Hello, everyone. This is Chapter 5 Applying the Ecological Model, a Theoretical Foundation for Human Services. This is for Counseling 4000. All right, introduction. 1970s. Ecological model is also known as the person in situation or person in environment. Overall, this is about looking at the client in the client's context, situation, or environment. So again, look at the client in their context. Okay, why do you think that is important? The reason why that's important is because that's where the client lives, right? And so how they react, it depends on where they are. Imagine you were in a room that was completely like stark white with a chair. You would act differently than if it was in your home. Maybe it's a little comfy, IKEA chair or whatever that you have at home, your couch. You're going to act a little bit different, right? All right, there are 3 levels of the ecological model. The micro level, which focuses on the client's personality, their motivations, affect. Affect is how your facial expressions are typically in counseling, and other personal attributes. How they affect the way they interact with others, how others are perceived, and how these characteristics contribute to well-being or instability. So here you're looking at the 3 levels, right? And the first one is the micro level. And this is what we just talked about, which is really pretty much the person, right? Okay. Now there is the meso level, focusing on the context immediately surrounding that person. So these are typically the community, right? The family, the church group, the close friends, the work group people. How does the above contribute to the problems or provide supports and solutions? So start to think about the people around that one specific person, and that would be the meso level. And then there is the macro level, which focuses on the larger society's characteristics and the way the person experiences them or how they're forced onto the client. So we're talking about larger systems, okay? The government, society, and that would be like the institutions, right? Those are like, buildings that provide either education or law or something like that. Organizations within the broader society, political systems, social stratification, racism, educational system, and the economy. So how does that all affect the people in the meso and then also the micro, which is the client themselves, right? So let's say that there is some sort of recession, so the economy is really bad. So how does that affect everyone around them? And then how does that affect the client themselves? All right, so the micro level, now let's look a little bit more in depth on each of those things, looking at what the person brings. So there's 2 categories when it comes to the micro level. Your biological and then your psychological. So let's look into the biological components or characteristics. That is your neurological development. So how's your body reacting to certain things? How does it react? Reflexes, how does it, respond when it comes to your body? Genetic makeup, so what is in your DNA? How are you expressed? What do you look like? So you can say about race and stuff like that as well. There's also degenerative processes, so how's your body breaking down as you get older? Illnesses such as chronic, terminal, and temporary. So illness is basically being sick, right? So that's part of your biology. How does your body react when it's a long-term, which is what chronic is? Terminal means that you're dying. And then also temporary. Temporary is like, let's say you break an arm or a leg. You are now disabled for a certain amount of time. It's a temporary amount of time. And then there's also just your overall physical health and then your nutrition. The psychological characteristics would be early shaping experiences. So you might have heard the phrase ACEs or the word ACEs or whatever. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So early shaping experiences as a child really does influence how you're going to grow up. And then there is also perceptions. That's basically how do you see yourself and other people, your personality, your affect. Again, how do you express your face, your emotions and stuff like that? How do you think is your cognition, your nurturance, which is basically about, how do you help grow things, let's say either a family or a society, your life transitions, current positions in the life cycle. So where are you in the life cycle from birth to death? And then your motivation. So what are you doing? Like the things that you're doing, what is inspiring you to do those things? So these would be their micro levels when it comes to these 3 circles, concentric circles that we're talking about. So let's look at, let's say, a trans woman or a black man or an obese woman. So can you see how there are certain types of psychological and biological components that are combined to create these types of people, right? They're all possible targets of subtle or overt discrimination from their micro level characteristics. So subtle basically means it's like people might not realize that they are being discriminated against because no one's going to really say anything. Versus overt means we literally will say, you look this way, we do not want you, right? So subtle might be, let's say you're applying for a job and you are a trans woman, right? And let's say that the person who's interviewing you is transphobic. So let's say that they interview 5 people. They're going to hire someone who's not trans and then say, well, we thought this other person was the best fit, even though maybe the trans person actually was the most best fit because of their biological and psychological differences to that specific person. Then they have now experienced discrimination, right? All right, the meso levels, so MESO or MEZZO levels, are your family. So these are the people that surround you. Your work group, so those are the people you work with. Social groups, the people you hang out with. Your family culture, your family values, your family structure. So not every family has, let's say, a mom and a dad. Some have grandparents only. Some have cousins, some don't. So it really does vary as well. And then also there's blended types of families and stuff like that. There's also religious groups. Social class, so where are you when it comes to your social levels, your wealth? If you're very wealthy, you might live in a really nice neighborhood where everyone is super rich and goes to private school, or you might not. You go to public school, which is again totally fine, but it does kind of affect how you behave, right? And then the role, status, conflict, and the strains that can exist within all of these types of surroundings or these groups of people. And the macro level, like we said before, the social context component, the larger culture of the society, the larger organization of the church or the workplace, the larger community, government, economy, social stratifications, prejudice and discrimination, and then political system. So these are bigger things that are not necessarily specific people that surround you, but it can affect you. Let's say like when it comes to like racism or discrimination within your community, that can be potentially harmful to you, right? Or affects you in a negative way. But it could also affect you in a positive way as well. So it really does depend on who you are, which is the micro level, right? And then the support systems, how you would react, which is the meso level. And then the macro level is, again, the larger community itself. Look at what the context brings. So now we're going to try to analyze some of the stuff that we just saw in those 3 levels. So how does your client see these contexts? Were they supported and encouraged, let's say, with a family level, which is the meso level? Was the society supportive of you? And that would be the macro level, right? Or were they oppressive and not nice? The context may show you the client's motivation. So how those people treat that client will determine or potentially let you know how they might see themselves. So let's say, for example, your client is gay, right? And the parents were not very supportive. So there's going to potentially be a negative reaction to that, right? So maybe the person themselves in the micro level does not see themselves very in a positive light. Let's say the government, which is the macro level, says we don't like LGBT people, they should get fired, right? So then that affects their financial situations and stuff like that. So then that becomes another layer to all of this. So the generalist approach, so this is just a common term, is when you use all those 3 levels together, the client, the families and groups, and then also the client's environment. So that's just called the generalist approach. So you can say this whole chapter is looking at everything in a generalist approach. All right, why context is important. So in the previous chapter, we talked about change, and change is always related to motivational interviewing, and then also with Carl Rogers and the humanist perspective. Okay, so that theory there. And then within interactions within context, it's always going to be with Yuri Bronfenbrenner. If you studied sociology, he is one of the major figures in that field when it comes to interactions among society. So he has his own version of these concentric circles. I believe there's 5 layers. It's a lot more nuanced, much more complex. This is an introductory with these 3 concentric circles for this chapter. But let's hear him say something about how these circles kind of interact with each other. Okay, the mesosystem comprises interrelations among 2 or more settings in which the developing person actively participates. So right there, what that is saying is that there are many things that are happening or existing at one time, and your client is going to interact with one or the other or more, within a small period of time, if not at the same time. In other words, you are looking at where people function daily, the groups with which they interact daily, and how those affect or do not affect their reasons for seeking help. So again, it depends on who you are. So if you are a person who has a lot of supports within your, let's say your middle group, your meso group, then you might have a lot of really great positive experiences. However, let's say your meso group doesn't necessarily interact as much as other people, then you might actually have a negative experience to it. So it really does depend. So every client that you see, you need to analyze and see who are their supports, which is that meso, and then about where are they living when it comes to the macro level. Okay, so again, it's an interaction between the person, their meso level, which is like families and people around them, and then the bigger picture, which is society. All right, seeking a balanced view of the client, all people interact with a number of systems in their environment. So again, we all exist within multiple environments. You are a student, so you have an academic environment now. If you're working, you have a working environment, right? So again, multiple things. We're not just one thing happening at one time. We're multiple things happening at the same time. You have a family, potentially. Some of y'all have pets. Some of y'all are dating. So those are all different things. Some of you are working. Some of you maybe have a disability and you require assistance with certain software or programs, and stuff like that. Who provides those things for you, right? The government. So then there's all these other levels that are all happening at the same time. Each person brings their unique characteristics. Caseworker needs to know how to see both the person and the environment, or may not make sense, okay? Or they might misunderstand what's going on. So if it's someone that they perceive potentially to be very successful and very easy, they have a lot of access to everything, the caseworker might go, oh, this person doesn't necessarily need as additional resources or something, right? So they really do need to understand who you are as a person and where you are living and how you're interacting with the society. In the book, they talk about Ralph and Eduardo. A little confusing in the book because they kind of give them each a scenario, then they flip the scenario, but I do want you to read it so you can understand how things could be perceived by each of those people depending on where they go. So if you see on the slide, there's this movie called Sliding Doors, and I believe, it's starring Gwyneth Paltrow, and I believe it's about how if she missed the subway, her life changes in one way, but if she got inside the subway train, then her life changed a different way. I think it's because she meets different people or something like that, and just dating people. And then they have these very different lives. It's also very similar to the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, is that, we all interact with the world in different ways. So what happens if, let's say, the mom becomes an actress versus the mom marrying her husband, and stuff like that? How do people's lives change and interact in different ways because of it? It's kind of like the possibilities of multiverses. Developmental transitions. So whenever you're reading anything that is psychology based and you hear the word or see the word developmental, that basically is talking about lifespan. So birth to death. Okay, so what this is talking about are all the different milestones that people experience through life. Okay, this is the transitional times throughout lifespan. Right, normal life changes are important, and they're also known as transitions. So here's some examples. Moving a person from one phase of life to another, requiring making adjustments or adapt in some way to new circumstances, and then just a part of normal development from birth to death. So again, we all start to age, right? So we go through all these different types of experiences, and we all pretty much do the same thing. Let's say, for example, puberty, right? Let's say go to school, at least until the 12th grade. Most of us probably will get married. I don't know. Maybe you'll be dating. Most of you will probably have children. So those are pretty common stuff, right? Obviously, because we're all allowed to make changes now. There's less people having children, less people getting married. So, but let's talk in general terms, right? Okay. Transitions are often expected, so there is often time to prepare. So yeah. So hopefully your parents, know that you're hitting that puberty time, and then they might start to teach you about certain things, potentially about your menstrual cycle, maybe about wet dreams, nocturnal emissions, and all those other things, developing breasts, your voice, all those different things can happen, and hopefully your parents will try to help you with most of those, or prepare you and say, hey, these are things that are going to happen, right? Treatment is often not necessary for all of these different transitions. You can get self-help, and then support groups can provide what a person needs to transition. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your friends who are your supports in this time period. Some will find it very overwhelming and negative. Again, some people, let's say, develop earlier, and typically they become much more unhappy. Well, it depends. Women or young girls, when they start to develop, let's say, their breasts and stuff like that, tend to have a more negative experience if they're doing it early, because they get a lot of attention from men or boys, and they don't necessarily feel comfortable and know how to react to all of those things. For boys, puberty will get them to be physically bigger. They might participate in athletic stuff, and then they actually might get praise for all that stuff. So some will find it very overwhelming and negative. Some will find it positive. They may need professional help to handle these changes if it is too overwhelming. So some people might get checked in with a mentor or a counselor, a support service person. All right, so here's some just examples from the book. I thought I would mention a bunch of them. I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to read some of them. Starting kindergarten, going to high school, the birth of a child, going on a first date, leaving home for the first time, losing your job, considerable financial losses, children leaving homes, so kind of like an empty nest, the birth of a grandchild, buying your first home, getting married, the death of a pet, divorce, children marrying, or the death of a child. Okay, so these are all things that a lot of us do end up experiencing over our lifetime. Hopefully some of it you don't necessarily have to experience yourself, but maybe people around you, loved ones who have experienced a death or a divorce, and stuff like that, right? But if you look at this list, it's nothing where you're like, whoa, this is like totally out of the blue. These are pretty common life transitions. All right, some do not cope as well with the changes by transition, like we said before. It might be too much to handle. Transition is seen as a negative then in this way, right? So, for example, going to preschool might seem fun with making new friends and trying new things, but going to preschool also might be scary because it is different from home life. And you've seen video footage, right? Even on social media, where a little kid is like crying so much to go to preschool is because they're so scared of the changes and stuff like that. Yeah. But some kids are able to kind of, prepare themselves. And this is why pre-K and early Head Start is so helpful for some kids, because if we recognize that they need those additional supports to learn how to be away from their family and to understand how to sit quietly, how to play with other people, how to talk and stuff like that, if they have that pre-training for some of them, it actually does help them quite a bit. Also, shows like Sesame Street will help people learn how to interact with each other, talk about their feelings, but also learning how to count, talk about colors, feelings, and stuff like that. So it really does, again, depend on your micro, your meso, and your macro. All right, developing interventions. The caseworker's job is to look at the client and the client's environment, gather the facts about each, understand how context a person, interacts with, and then also how it may harm the client or benefit the client as well. So again, depending on who they surround themselves with, it could be beneficial or not, right? And so we're going to look into those things as a caseworker, and then we're going to try to help them either surround themselves with more healthier supports or something like that. Okay. Develop a plan that addresses the maladaptive interactions between the client and the environment. Note what is going well, such as its support. So here, think about, like, let's say a person who's trying to stop drinking, trying to become sober, right? So maladaptive interactions might be going to the neighborhood bar. So instead of when they go home from work, they don't pass by that neighborhood bar, they go a different route. Okay, there are two things: personal interventions that strengthen the person to handle the environment, and environmental interventions that alter the context to better accommodate the person. So what now we're talking about is we need to also change what's going around them as well if it's not healthy, right? But we do also need that client themselves to also change as well. And so we'll give you some examples in the next slide. All right, so for example, the client might need to go to AA for substance abuse, but the environment also potentially needs to change as well. So that might be family education to support sobriety. So maybe their family members don't really understand how big of a deal addiction is, right? Maybe none of them have any addictions, or maybe they all love to drink. We don't know, so we need to figure it out. And then from there going, hey, our client, let's say John, is trying to be sober, so maybe we don't drink in front of him, or we don't throw parties where it's a lot of, drunken messes and stuff like that around them. Yeah. So we're changing the person, but we're also changing the environment as well. Here's another example is the parent skills training for abusive parents, but we also want temporary removal from the home to foster care. So if parents are abusive, you might need to remove the children from the environment, right? So that they can learn about it and not harm their children at the same time. Here's another example. A client is a child that was abused. They might start to attend group therapy. But the environment is also, while they are doing that, they're probably going to be in foster care. And so the foster care parents are given information to create a supportive foster home environment as well. So you can see that micro, macro, but also the meso in the middle, which are the people, right? But the system is the foster care system, let's say. All right, client is job training for a person with a cognitive disability. So let's say this person has a disability and it affects their cognition, but they're also learning how to get a job, right? But the environment is typically a job coach will go into a business and then also teach the employer how to provide a supportive and working environment for that client as well. Okay, here is the client is an interpersonal skills training for adolescents into minor trouble. So that is how to communicate better with other people. That's for that child, the adolescent that's in trouble. But we also talk about the environment, which is the use of the child's interest to develop more constructive in-school activities. So if we know that this child is getting into a lot of trouble, maybe we need to also keep them more interested in school. So let's find out what they're interested in and then kind of support them by providing resources that interest them so that they can focus, let's say, on school. Maybe it's, like changing everything so that's baseball related or Barbie related or whatever it is, right? Okay, client, medication for a person with schizophrenia. So then that's like directly to that person. But also the environment is to develop constructive connections with the local church. So if they are someone who attends church all the time, we want to make sure that that environment welcomes this person as they're going through and living with schizophrenia, but also finding the medication that's going to be best for them so that they're able to act in a more stable, productive, healthy way. All right, macro level interventions are advocacy. Caseworkers do not just work with the clients, they can also address the problem as well. So now we're talking about here is how as a caseworker, you can actually affect the macro level. The macro level, like we said before, was like the government, educational systems, or something like that, institutions, yeah? So able to speak on conditions that need to be remedied in our larger society. So let's say, for example, we're talking about a child who's been abused, right? So we're going to obviously advocate for them and make sure that they get the safe space, maybe with a foster parent, continuing school, but also trying to connect them or reunite them with their family eventually, right? But we also know that this is a common problem. So maybe there should be laws that might be changed or need to be changed to prevent the future people who might also fall into the same situation. So able to speak on conditions that need to be remedied in a larger society, pay attention to the statistics and use it to persuade lawmakers and others in power to take action. So maybe there is a specific way that we need to work with parents who are abusive. How do we work with children who have been abused to protect them and prevent this from happening in the future? So you might lobby certain laws, certain rules, mandatory things, whatever it is that you think could be appropriate. And when you lobby those people, then you're able to potentially change laws and then affect everyone. Even ones that you will never ever see or meet in your future, they will be affected by you, right? Or by, your actions. Now you're advocating for an entire population, many of whom are not your clients at your agency, but they will also benefit from this as well. So you can see how working from the micro and then affecting their meso, which is their families and stuff like that, but then also advocating for change. Sometimes you'll see people go over to Washington, D.C. to advocate for certain laws to change and stuff like that, and that is how we're talking about micro or macro level interventions as advocacy. Okay, that's it for the end of this chapter. Bye.